was developed 16 years ago in London, England. And I wanted to have this discussion because it talks about the African Socialist International. That is the organization that represents really in a concrete way the theory of African internationalism, the application, the practical application of the struggle that we have to make to win our freedom. This whole issue of the African Socialist International and African internationalism is something that is not just a casual discussion that we should engage in discussing, talking about. The events all around us today magnify or should magnify for us why it is critical for African people to have some kind of clarity on what it is that we're engaged in, what kind of struggle we're involved in. The African People's Socialist Party came to understand a long time ago that there's no way that we can find our genuine liberation as a people, trying to fight it within just these borders that have been created up for us by white power. These are artificial borders. These are borders that were created, many of them in the process of Europe itself coming into being, coming into existence. And that we have suffered serious kinds of setbacks and defeats precisely because we did not recognize the totality of our struggle. So we find ourselves trying to fight as Haitians, or as struggle as Jamaicans, or as Nigerians, or Ghanaians, or what's often been called Black Americans. And it hasn't been very successful because we've got an enemy and have always had an enemy that has an international scope, that exists on an international level, and has required of us a kind of really pedestrian and local worldview, extremely localized worldview. It's extremely significant that everywhere we are, generally speaking, we are struggling using definitions given to us for what our movement and struggle should be about by the very ones against whom we are struggling. They'll never lose, and we'll never win under those circumstances. We've had a situation where inside the United States in particular, we have seen the idea that African people here have to fight for a liberated nation in what's called the Black Belt South. And this Black Belt South position is something that was born as part of a struggle against Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association that notoriously raised the slogan Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad, and organized African people throughout the world for the conquest of our national liberation. But inside the United States in particular, one of the forces that we had to contend with most for the leadership of African people, in addition to the United States government itself, was the Communist Party of the United States, especially since its founding in 1919. And the first position that it took with its founding was to declare that was an assault on Marcus Garvey. The Communist Party USA had this incredible problem of trying to organize African people in the face of the fact that the majority of Africans who were politically active, the huge majority, were followers of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and Marcus Garvey, whose slogan was Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad. and again, who was organizing African people all around the world. So here you have this organization, the Communist Party USA, essentially a white organization that was trying to incorporate the most dynamic militant sector of the population inside this country into its own organization. And that was the African population. But it couldn't do it successfully because most of the people were organized around, most of the Africans who were active were members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association under the leadership of Marcus Garvey. And the distinguishing thing about Garvey's movement was that it was not just a group of intellectuals who got together to discuss the problems, as you might find with the white-led NAACP at that time. It was an organization that really embraced the majority of African people coming from, various walks of life, and the majority of whom were working people with all kinds of occupations. So the Communist Party USA had an extremely difficult time trying to win the masses of African people into its organization. This is in the face of the fact that the masses of white people were not communists, were not involved in struggles for liberation. In fact, the masses of white people were the ones that the Universal Negro Improvement Association had to fight against inside the United States. So the Communist Party, as every white left force has done historically, sought to build itself through organizing African people. But in order to do that, it had to fight against the notion that African people were a distinct nation of our own, and therefore it had to reduce us to the status of a sector, an auxiliary sector at that, of the white workers. So we were all like dark-skinned workers with no particular specific interests as African people. But it became clear with the existence of the Garvey movement that that wasn't working. What happened was the Communist Party had to adopt another politic, and this was something that would come about at the Communist International meeting, where a guy who was actually a Russian wrote the position about the Black Belt South, came up with this what was supposed to be a theory of Africans inside the United States had been forged into a new nation through slavery in the southern part of the United States. And that was called the Black Belt South theory. This was what they called the national question. This was how they would address the so-called national question here in the United States. And so Africans were now no longer Africans as such. We were a new nation with our identity attached to the section of the South where we endured the most brutal kind of slavery, et cetera. And now that was the reality that we were supposed to be addressing. So what the Communist Party USA had done had been forced to recognize by the success of the Garvey movement that Africans did experience ourselves as being a separate, distinct group of people, a nation, distinct from the white man, distinct from the U.S., distinct from quote unquote America that was brutalizing us. And recognizing that, they came up with a theory that would allow us to be black and have a national identity of sorts, but would lock us into here in the United States, that our home would still be the United States. Now it's the Black Belt South, which still, depending on how successful the Communist Party USA would still give them a powerful weapon in the struggle that they considered the white workers and themselves, that they considered themselves the leaders of, would give them a powerful weapon in terms of the struggle for the emancipation of the working class. So this was what the Communist Party USA had come up with. And then later on, of course, even with that, the Communist Party USA was never that successful. There was an organization called the African Blood Brotherhood that had that position. And the African Blood Brotherhood was one that was supported in a very serious way by the Communist Party USA. In fact, one of the most recognized representatives, African representatives of the Communist Party USA, to whom the authorship of the Black Belt South position was attributed, was a man named Harry Haywood. And he was someone who walked around the million-strong Garvey movement to join the Communist Party USA when there were only 50 Africans in the Communist Party USA. So he had an organization of 50, with 50 Africans in it, the vast majority of Africans following Garvey. And this guy, Harry Haywood, who just wanted to integrate with white people, that was his line, and had to be won to even adopt the Black Belt South theory by a white guy out of Russia, became the public face and the one to whom the authorship of the position was accredited. So, but they still were not super successful in winning African people to that position. Though, as I mentioned, the African Blood Brotherhood was an African organization that held that position, but it was locked to the hip of the Communist Party USA. And Harry Haywood, the guy that I mentioned, when he joined the Communist Party, he was assigned to the African Blood Brotherhood. That was where he was assigned. He was a member of the African Blood Brotherhood. Later on, we saw in particular in the 1960s, when the struggle of African people heated up again. Then, and I'm not speaking. Obviously, I have not addressed the Du Bois factor, who, as the mouthpiece of the NAACP, fought mighty battles with Marcus Garvey for the loyalty of, actually he didn't fight for the loyalty of African people so much as he fought for the recognition by white power as the representative of African people. That was the difference in Garvey and Du Bois. Garvey organized millions of African people into the Universal Negro Improvement Association and to the various campaigns that it represented, to the various enterprises that was connected to them. Du Bois was, as I mentioned, a public face for the white-run NAACP, and became the editor of its magazine, The Crisis. And he was fought very seriously. He was the one who was the author of a talented 10th position, basically assuming that it was the talented 10th, the most educated sector of the African community that should be the former representatives of the vast majority of the rest of us. And it was he who engaged Marcus Garvey in an incredible war, almost, that called on it support from the United States government on a number of occasions. Du Bois was a very brilliant man, but he was also locked in. He was an American patriot of sorts. And so the Pan-Africanist, he was the one who organized the modern Pan-Africanist Congress movement that was organized for the purpose of fighting against Marcus Garvey. More than anything else, this basis was the struggle against Garvey and the Garvey movement and the whole notion of Africans going back to Africa or being connected to Africa in that way. So you had the emergence of the Pan-Africanist movement, which was a middle class movement, a handful of African intellectuals from the United States and various other places were the chief proponents and leaders of that organization. And in addition to Du Bois, who was somebody who was the public face of the white-run NAACP, you had others the guy in France. I hate to call his name because I always mispronounce it, but it's Blasc, Blaise Diagne Danye. Well, that's why I say I hate to to Diagne, who was actually a member at the very time France was colonizing Senegal, the place where he was from. And France has, colonies all over Africa, in fact. And he was one of the persons in France that helped to organize the first Pan-Africanist Congress in 1919. And so the Pan-Africanist movement became another manifestation, and Pan-Africanism as a concept became another manifestation of response to the conditions that African people are confronted with in this country, that we see it has extreme shortcomings, and not the least of which being the fact that it was a movement that actually was organized for the purpose of fighting against an all-African effort for self-government and for unification of Black people throughout the world. So these are two manifestations of struggles from within our community of sorts, from Black people who manifestations of politics that attempted to respond to the national aspirations and character of the struggle of Black people. There were movements, other movements, that didn't even recognize Africans as part of a nation at all, as a distinct group. We were just chocolate-colored white workers. So in the 1960s, we saw the emergence of a new variation of the Black Belt South theory that came from the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa. These were Africans who characterized themselves and ourselves as New Africans. And it was not the Black Belt South. It was a very practical approach to the question. And there were 5 distinct states in the South that where the African nation was located. And I know they were Mississippi, I think Georgia, perhaps the 2 Carolinas, Louisiana, I think, and maybe Alabama. I'm not sure, but there were 5 of these states, and these are the 5 states that now constituted the national homeland of African people in the United States. And it shouldn't take too much to see the shortcomings of that. But these are positions that are not very different in some ways from the notion that Africans who were now located on the island, this tiny island in the Caribbean, now Puerto Ricans or Cubans or Haitians or Africans in this landmass that the British had delineated as a particular state in Ghana or Nigeria. That it's really not that fundamentally different. I mean, this is a fact that somebody has carved out a territory, carved out a place, and now because we are in this place, because we are in this specific place, that's now what our identity is supposed to that reality is supposed to define who we are. And it's totally messed up because it's absolutely undialectical or metaphysical kind of position, because if somehow we can become this thing in this place without having a relationship to all the other African people. Somehow our whole reality is transformed based on this particular place on the earth where we are living at that moment. And so that shapes our reality, and it separates our existence in a very deep and profound way from the reality of the whole that we were once a part of before somebody put us in these locations or carved up the places where we were located and gave them different names. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. The thing that's changed, the only thing, or the fundamental thing that's changed, of course, is somebody now has control over our right to self-determination. And then they've created borders for us and said, this is your reality. This is your reality. Colonialism created this reality. Slavery created this reality. And this is your origin right now. This is who you are. And now your reality is defined by your relationship to the colonizer, to the slave master, and to a particular territory that was created specifically for you. It is determined by that more than it is by your relationship of thousands of years with other Africans who have been dislocated as a part of the same process that gave you a new identity. I hope that wasn't too convoluted. So this new African position came up, 5 states came up, and there are still people who hold to that today. In fact, we work with an organization. We have worked with the New Africanists over a period of time. We have struggled with the New Africans over a period of time. Actually, we have printed a series of articles that we put in book form that sort of represented the struggles that we were having with people who were upholding the New Africanist position, just as we've done with the Pan-Africanists in the past as well. And even right now, in the Black is Back Coalition, one of the latest organizations to join the coalition is the New Africanist Independence Party. And they're New Africanists because they hold the same basic line about Africans constituting some kind of new African nation in these 5 states. It's extraordinary. And the thing that makes it's very practical. You see, it's practical in the sense that it seeks to say, okay, here's some land, we own this land, we want to be free, let's take this land, and this land then will allow us to be self-governing. So it seems to be quite practical, and people are attracted to it in part because of that. The problem is that there's a form of severe opportunism for a number of reasons. And not the least, of course, is that it's somebody else's land. You know, that, in my view, is a deep, profound. Well, they say, well, they aren't here, which is the same thing the white people say about stealing South Africa. There's nobody here. What we got here is our land. We are now South Africans, etc. So I just think that, and again, it does not connect us. It separates us rather than connects us with the entire African world. It weakens us rather than strengthens us. And so those are some of the contradictions. So African internationalism is not only in contention with imperialism right up front, but it is also contending with the other different kinds of politics. It obviously has contention with those who tell us that we should lay down on our bellies and crawl for admission into the white world, the so-called integrationists, the patriotic Americans and stuff like that. So obviously, we are in contention with those, but we are also in contention with these other lines that would obscure our national identity and would undermine our ability to organize the African world to defend ourselves against an international enemy. It's not like we got a Mississippi enemy or a South Carolina enemy, something like that. And the other thing, of course, is if we're ever strong enough to take 5 states, why stop there? You know what I mean? If you can take 5, you know, why not take 7? Why not 13? Why not the whole damn thing? You know what I mean? It just doesn't hold together. So I'm just saying this as part of the context for looking at this question of the African Socialist International and its manifestation, because in many ways it articulates a response to a lot of the issues that I've just raised without clearly and expressly stating that, but it does anyway. And the other thing that's really important is that people have to be aware of the crisis of the whole imperialist project right now. We've seen how as the imperialists were trying to grow their unity, and we've been watching this over a number of years, and they not just growing their unity in the abstract, they're growing their unity. The whole European nation, the whole European identity itself came about as a consequence of the collective effort that Europe was making to end slavery, colonialism, and what have you. That's the thing that helped define European as distinctly different and separate from the rest of everybody else. And that's the thing that paid it off. The slavery, the payoff from slavery and from colonialism, the birth of that gave birth to capitalism. This has been the payoff for the unity that has come about as a consequence of slavery and colonialism. You understand? This is where the whole identity of white people come from. This is where white people come from. This is where Europe comes from. There were no such things as white people or Europe until this process of slavery and colonialism emerged in the world. That's the foundation that all of it, upon which all of it rests. And at different times, you've seen Europeans go to war over who was going to get what part of the enslaved or colonized populations. And they begin to get wiser. And at a couple of places, times in particular, and this is not the only time, because there were other wars that preceded in other conferences, that European-wide conferences that preceded it to try to consolidate Europeans in this one single block that's defined what the European nations were, and things like this has happened over and over again. But in 1919, after the first worldwide imperialist war to redivide the world, and this, of course, this is 1919. You got to remember, just a few years earlier, 1884 and 1885, Europe was about to go to war with each other. It was about to fracture and fight each other over Africa. So I say, hey, let's not fight. Let's sit down and let's have a conference, and we split up the niggas. We don't have to fight over. Let's split them up. Let's come to some kind of agreement among ourselves. And that was the Berlin Conference, 1884 and 85. So that consolidated a kind of unity. And then, so we had all these colonial powers now, all of them rich to the hilt, in part, again, as a part of the process. This is a part of the thing that even gave rise and strength to the thing that we now know as capitalism. It's strengthened by this, this event. And then in 1919, another struggle happened among Europeans to redivide the world again. It created carnage all over everything. And at this time, what was clearly recognized as a problem was this phenomenon that they were calling nationalism. That the different entities, although I contend that Europe itself is a nation that just has different state powers located on certain territories, but this thing they define it as nationalism, so that the interests of these groups of European, the separate interests of separate groups of European overwhelmed and overpowered the common interest that they all had, and they're all going for themselves, fighting to redivide the world. So 1919, that war ended, I think, in what, 1917? In 1919, no, that was from 1917 to 1919. The war ended in 1919. D.C. Wilson, who was president of the United States, pulled together this thing called the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was supposed to be the thing that would unite the world. This is the League of Nations, all the nations in the world, right? Which meant white nations, right? And they were to guarantee peace. They created all kinds of institutions that were supposed to be for that purpose. But the primary deal was it would create a relationship between European powers for the collective management and governance of the peoples of the world, so they wouldn't have to fight each other. So it was like a permanent Berlin Conference. It was a permanent situation that they tried to set up, but the U.S. Congress wouldn't buy it. So the U.S. was not a part of the League of Nations. and its headquarters was in Geneva, which is, and then in 1945, when another war to split up the world came about, well, the end of after that war, they created the United Nations. This was a U.S., again, a U.S. inspired thing to create the United Nations. And again, it was something that was going to protect. We look at the Charter of the United Nations, you know, the scourge of war, all this stuff was going to be, but it was a white institution. And it was, again, something that created to manage the rest of the world. Now what we've been faced with, of course, even under those circumstances, as most peoples became independent, formally independent, for a brief period in the 1960s in particular, they really upset the United Nations, because you had countries or peoples coming out of Africa who were dissatisfied with the setup of the United Nations, began to push for other kinds of principles. They created different conventions and different kinds of international law that had to do with the colonized peoples and things like that. It really shook the thing up for a while, until the U.S. And in particular succeeded in crushing most of the struggles for national liberation, overthrowing people and killing people like Malcolm, overthrowing people like Nkrumah, murdering Lumumba, a whole bunch of other people. They crushed that the foundation, the basis for the positive possibilities in the United Nations, crushed as a consequence of that. Okay, and now what we see is that we've been undergoing for a while now a real challenge to the hegemony, to the solidarity of Europe. It's not coming from something inside Europe. It's coming because people outside of Europe are now taking back our resources, our freedoms, and stuff like that. And that's the thing that begins to threaten the cohesion of Europe, the unity of Europe. The same thing that brought Europe together was the benefit that it shared collectively from raping the rest of the world. Now the people who are being raped are fighting back and making it more difficult for that to happen. So you see Europe turning more inward now, struggling with each other. Who's going to get what? And that's what the white people in England saying, we don't want to be a part of this thing anymore. Not because we don't like the white people. When they say they want Brexit, they want to get out of Europe, it ain't because they don't like other white people in Europe. It's because now with those open borders that they have, that means that more people are coming from the Arab world, more people coming from Africa and all these other places. And once they get to any place in Europe, they can get into where they are. It means that now the people who they are killing in other places around the world have easy access to them, because any place they get in Europe opens the door for any other place in Europe. This is why they are scrambling like they're scrambling. So you see this whole thing, and then you hear with these white people, the political manifestation of this in part is white people, like Trump saying, we want our country back. That's what the white people in England say. We want our country back from whom? They're not saying they want it back from the Germans. They're not saying they want it back from the French. They want it back from all the mosque, from all of this Allah Akbar. They want it back from the car bombs and other things that being a part of the empire has begun to bring with it in a very serious way. They want it back from the niggers. They want it back from all of those forces. That's who upsets the sensibility and the cultural and balance inside Europe. Not the French-speaking Swiss. It's the Arabic-speaking people. It's the children of Algerians who lived under French colonialism, who now, once they in France, they can go any place in Europe. And that's the thing that's saying hell no. And also because as the countries win more of their freedom, it means that Europe, it means that they are denying the ability of certain assets to come into Europe that used to flow easily. I'm talking about a Europe where in some places, not only a new mother get several months paid leave, but the daddy too. This is the reality. I'm talking about a Europe where, like France now is involved in a serious kind of struggle because they can't fire. They can't fire the workers in France. They cannot fire the workers in France. And they want to be able to fire the workers in France because the workers have so many rights now. Well, where do these rights come from? The rights come as a consequence of France living off the fat of the land, and the fat of the land has been us and all of the other people. Now that France is losing these resources, then France is putting forth what they call austerity. That you got to work now, you got to come to work now and actually work, and then and we want to be able to fire your ass, and they need to be able to fire you because if they can't fire you, then they don't have a labor pool with which they can threaten the people who do have a job. I can reduce your wages. I can do all this stuff and make you work harder than you ever worked before because there are 50 people out there who want your job. And so with this labor reserve force that's out there, all the workers can be threatened to be more productive. They can't do that. Now that's what many of the struggles in France are about. So when you look at this whole Brexit thing, the possibilities of the whole thing unraveling precisely because of the struggles of people to take back our resources, what we're looking at, and all the white people around the world, not just in England, but the majority of the people in France want to get out of Brexit, out of this European Union. That's according to polls. You got whole huge movements developing places like Sweden, where Makta is calling from. You got even in the tolerant Netherlands, where you can go and openly smoke hash and go to the market to shop for women in the right districts and what have you. I mean, all of this is, they are having these whole movements kick out the so-called immigrants and things like that. So it's a whole thing that's sweeping, and all the white people are saying, we want to take back our country. At the same time, they say we want to take back our country. Africans are faced with leadership around the world saying we want to be with the white people. You understand? That's the movements we got. Or if we don't want to be with the white people, we don't want to be with the whole Africa, and we just want to have our little patch over here. And so as the European thing is fracturing, now the question of our direction and our unity is before us in bold relief. I just wanted to, I know that's a long introduction. That introduction is almost as long as the study, but I think it's important to give some background to it. So I want to start reading now, with your permission. This is Manifesto of the African Socialist International. It was written in London, England, 2000, in the living room of Louise Kinshasa, who is the Secretary General of the African Socialist International. Manifesto of the African Socialist International. African people throughout the world are rising up. We have entered into the new millennium in motion, struggling to overturn the 500-year legacy of oppression and exploitation to which we have been subjected by a parasitic social system born at our expense. We are fighting to reclaim our destiny as a single people whose forced dispersal in a world defined by artificial borders has served to undermine our common identity and dilute our collective strength. And we say a world defined by artificial borders. It's not just Africa. Do you understand? I mean, because when you look at what's happening in the Middle East, and even this phenomenon they call the Islamic State, or the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, you're talking about a response to an historical event that happened also in 1919, where the French in particular and the British, with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, they carved up and created many of the territories that we're looking at, Lebanon, Syria. What it looks like right now is stuff that the Europeans themselves, Saudi Arabia, they created this. And they put in leadership in those places puppets that they could use to control the people there and to control the resources in those territories. So when you're looking at what's happening in the world, this is part of it. How the hell are you going to separate yourself from the world? How the hell you going to say, well, I'm just fighting for Mississippi or barbecue stands at least, in Mississippi, when the whole damn world is undergoing this? How are you going to have some kind of black position that's separate from the reality of the total world. It doesn't work that way. And that's why we say African internationalism is not just something that speaks to or responds to the Black question. It responds to the world. It responds to history and the location and place of peoples in the whole world. And if you don't have that, you don't have really a real philosophy. We are everywhere. We're in Chicago, Illinois, in Florida, Texas, California, New York, in the United States, within North America, as well as Toronto and Montreal in Canada. We are in Brasilia in Brazil, Caracas in Venezuela, Bluefields in Nicaragua, in Central and South America. We are in Trinidad, Haiti, Jamaica, Guadalupe, Martinique, Dominica, the Bahamas, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Barbados, and all the islands of the Caribbean. We are in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and Nottingham in England. We are in Paris, Lille, Lyon, Marseille, and Nice in France. We are in Brussels, Belgium, Amsterdam, Holland, Berlin, Germany, Rome, Italy, as well as Spain, Portugal, Russia, Turkey, and all of Eastern Europe. We reside in the hundreds of millions in our ancient motherland, which was the birthplace of humankind more than 150,000 years ago, and which served as the cradle of human civilization more than 10,000 years ago. The life and historical experience of our people over the last 500 years constitute the primary force which has given shape to the modern world. The life and historical experience of our people over the last 500 years constitute the primary force which has given shape to the modern world. That's a critical statement. It is a world where the vast majority of the people on the planet Earth are living in starvation, misery, disease, ignorance, and terror. At the same time, Europe and North America control the world's wealth at gunpoint and rest upon the prostrate, bloody, and abscess back of the workers and peasants of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The world capitalist economy began with Europe's assault on our Africa and the kidnapping, captivity, colonial enslavement, and dispersal of African people throughout what is now known as the Americas. We're talking about how African people, where we are. This barbaric assault upon African people depopulated our motherland of hundreds of millions of human beings. It destroyed our ancient civilization, and it unleashed a European wave of mass murder that killed hundreds of millions of human beings through slave raiding wars. It left a trail of human carnage over the middle passage of the Atlantic Ocean and condemned the captive African people of the Americas to death through torture, miserable toil, and cultural annihilation. The initial assault upon Africa, along with the genocidal extermination of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and the looting of Asia and the Middle East, has lifted Europe out of millennia of disease, poverty, fratricidal warfare, and mass murder. Europe's militarism and aggression was a part of a culture whose economic base was built upon warfare and conquest between competing European tribes and kingdoms. Before this, there was no concept of Europe or white people as a monolithic group. Europe's nation states and continental unity were forged through its assault upon the world's peoples. This unity was consolidated through the conquest, invasion, enslavement of the peoples of Asia, and the carving up of the African continent by European colonial powers in the 19th century. Today, 1 billion African people throughout the world are engaged in a desperate struggle for survival within a world whose economic foundations were built through the theft of our labor and resources. African people comprise half of the world's population that live on less than $2 a day. We are subjected to genocidal biological warfare through the use of AIDS, Ebola, and other often curable diseases, some of which are manufactured for our destruction. Today, our motherland is undergoing a frenzy of rape and looting more intense and insidious than slavery. This takes the form of trade and so-called debt, which brings development to Europe, North America, and increasingly Japan, while it commits mass murder against our people through artificial famine and transformation of our homeland into an economic wasteland. However, we continue to struggle, and we will win. The historical experience of African people throughout the world has forged our people into a revolutionary nation comprised primarily of workers and poor peasants. We continue to form the critical army of labor for world imperialism in the mines of Congo, South Africa, and Zambia, in the plantations and farms of Ghana, the Ivory Coast, the Caribbean, in the factories of Detroit, Manchester, Lyon, and Brussels, as well as the hundreds of prison dungeons throughout the world, including those that hold 1 million African people captive in the United States of North America. Included among this massive force of African workers are the hundreds of millions of unemployed African laborers who constitute a massive reserve of labor pool for imperialism. Hunger and starvation are used as weapons of economic warfare aimed at suppressing the value of African labor power. You see, suppressing the value of African labor power, starvation, hunger, huge pool of unemployed workers who are out there. You can't make any money because even if you get a job, they don't have to pay you, because what you gonna do? What are you gonna do? If you don't take the job at Burger King, what are you gonna do? If you don't take the job at Taco Bell, what are you gonna do? So that means you don't have any because there are 50, 100 Africans out there waiting to take your job. And so they can use this to manipulate and actually just devalue African labor. They don't have to pay you the value of your labor power. They don't even have to pay you enough to live, because you'll try to eat off scraps, because you'll be like Sister Yeshitela, who got 5 children to feed and what have you. Get up early in the morning, walk, catch the bus, do any damn thing you can do, because there are 50, 100 people out there who want your job, and they will scrap like hell, and you become the best workers in the damn world because of that. And then your productivity, you create extremely high productivity because you produce a lot for little. And your value of your labor is decreased. You see what we're saying? Okay. So, moreover, this labor force is to work day and night and to migrate from country to country and continent to continent just to eat. Just to eat. The laws that govern nature and the entire universe necessitate life and death, and determine the rise of the new and the vanquishing of the old in an infinitely unfolding struggle between opposing forces. In the same way, we know that the resurrection of Africa and African people is inevitable, and it cannot be stopped. The liberation of Africa will be brought about through the coming worldwide upheaval of African workers and poor peasants. A sleeping giant poised to seize our freedom, happiness, and wealth from imperialist white power and deal it the death blow the world's peoples are awaiting Africa to strike. While our Africa has been formally freed from direct colonial rule and European domination, it suffers from an oppressive system that in fact maintains the domination of its former masters, often in partnership with a consortium of imperialist economic and financial interests based in the United States, Europe, and Japan, and China. During the 1950s and 1960s, a mass revolutionary upsurge took the world by storm. This revolutionary motion was many times expressed in the mobilization of armed African workers and peasant resistance in Africa. African people forever defeated the tyranny of direct white colonial rule and domination. However, our victory was incomplete, for our movement succeeded only in defeating the open imperialist rule known as colonialism. The hidden, indirect form of imperialist rule called Neocolonialism by Kwame Nkrumah has reduced Africa and her people to a state of destitution and desperation not seen since the destruction and genocidal mass murder of the slave trade or the colonial wars of conquest unleashed by Europe during the late 19th century. The agents of neocolonialism, the extension of enemy power into the ranks of our own nation throughout the world, take the form of the African primitive petty bourgeoisie. This tiny social class holds Africa in captivity in the service of imperialism and serves as a cover for continued white rule and domination. This class sees the fate of Africa and African people as forever under the subjugation of white power. It has secured its own position of prestige and prosperity as collaborators with imperialism, which continues to control Africa's resources and loot Africa's wealth. It's important to say this because this takes us to the class question that Africans loathe, particularly African nationalists and cultural nationalists, are loath to recognize, that would, say that the white man is the enemy and all of us are the same. But there's a sector living among us who are not the people. They are the oppressor. They live with the oppressor. They serve the oppressor. Their very future and fate is dependent upon this relationship that they have with a white power as it exists today. The success of the African Revolution will reduce their stature in their own face, will reduce their ability to continue to live off the crumbs that they are given as partners or junior partners in the exploitation of the rest of the African nation. So they fight as hard and harder than the white man to maintain this relationship. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. The African primitive petty bourgeoisie, therefore, has no interest in Africa's liberation and unification, or the emancipation of the hundreds of millions of African workers and peasants from famine and back-breaking toil. The mighty awakening of African workers and poor peasants has unleashed convulsions throughout the continent through the toppling of Mobutu, the retreat of French imperialism, the upheaval and rebellions throughout Zimbabwe, Nigeria, the Central African Republic, Ivory Coast, Kenya, as well as in St. Petersburg, Florida. The rising up of African workers has Africa's neo-colonial traders and collaborators trembling in their boots. It is the workers and poor peasants who will overthrow the oppressive power the African petty bourgeoisie holds over Africa in particular, in partnership with imperialism. This awakening will constitute an African revolution that will consolidate our national consciousness, culture, and identity through mass struggle on an international scale. It will constitute the final offensive against imperialism and white power, which will have nowhere left to run as the oppressed hundreds of millions of African workers and poor peasants consciously pursue our historic mission of the total unification of the African continent and African people throughout the world. Never again will we allow our people to be slaves or to be divided by languages, ethnic groupings, false borders, or false micro-nationalities. This awakening African people stand at the vanguard of the struggle of the world's oppressed people to build a new world in which the currently endured humiliation, famine, terror, and disease becomes a distant, faded memory. We believe that it is only fitting that the people who gave birth to world civilization and who are the primary victims of the barbarism that has established hegemony throughout the world take responsibility for leading the struggle for liberation of the majority of the planet from the tyranny and despotism of US-led world imperialism. Brothers and sisters, the hour of African redemption, which the great Marcus Garvey so prophetically envisioned many years ago, is upon us. We must build the African Socialist International and unite our dispersed, oppressed, and 1 billion strong African nation under the slogan, touch one, touch all. We must build the ASI under the leadership of the African workers, aligned with the poor peasantry, for it is they who are the creators of social wealth and value. It is they who are the only social force capable of waging our liberation struggle to its victorious conclusion. African workers and peasants must assume the leadership of our society as a condition for our freedom. Uhuru. So, I want to go ahead now and open it up. And remember, in order to participate in this discussion, you're going to have to star what? Star five? Star five.
No, that's it. We need ourselves.
Anyway, try.
Star five.
That's what you do.
Star five.
Yeah.
So do star five twice in order. So I want to open it up for discussion. Any discussion, comrades, brothers and sisters?
They're gonna unmute themselves.
I just wanted to say that it's, part of what I want to do in having this discussion. First of all, I want to recognize that there's this crisis that the whole imperialist order is experiencing now. It's deepening. We talked about an uneasy equilibrium. That the whole political report to the Sixth Congress revolved around the notion of this period being one where there was this uneasy equilibrium in the imperialist order. And everything that we see on a daily basis continues to reaffirm that, to validate that position. And the depth of the crisis that is upon the white world, Europe and the white world, and that contaminates the entire capitalist world economy would be hard to exaggerate. The potential for wars and other kinds of things, because now instead of having a collection of 28 different separate different European states vying with each other, as and now instead of them being collectively sucking the blood of the world and having come to some conclusion about joint trade and markets and the rest of that, it's every white man for himself. And so you can see another scramble and contention and competition between the different forces. Who's going to make what kind of deal, and who's going to take this or that, who's going to benefit the most. And that's part of what you're looking at. And so there's great potential for war. You will see Africa now having to, fend off just a whole host of different forces. And I'm not complaining. In fact, to see the whole imperialist order in this state of crisis and fracturing like it is extremely helpful. But it depends also on our unity. And in order for us to be united the way we need to be united, then we need to have some coherent advanced revolutionary theory that explains the world as it is. And the party and African internationalism are the only vehicles that I'm aware of that does this. So what we do now is critically important. And again, I want to say that this is not just a talk fest that we engaged in. This is a study of the African People's Socialist Party. It's an African internationalist view of the world that we are engaged in. And it's one that we initiated in part to give greater cohesion and capability to the growing numbers of people who are coming into the African People's Socialist Party, and in many instances located at critical places in our structures. So that's what this is about. It's not just a talk fest. It's not a debate thing. It's the party's worldview. That's what the study is about. And it's about African internationalism. And here we're talking about the African Socialist International. And to mention about the African Socialist International, and let me just, I want people to be able to talk, but I want to give a little background on that. Because in the 1960s, what we saw during the height of the revolution happening in the world and in Africa, much of what was occurring was being influenced in a very serious way by the struggle against imperialism by Russia or the Soviet Union, and to a lesser extent by China. China more ideologically, but the Soviet Union that provided sometimes guns, training, both ideologically and organizationally, for forces who were struggling against Europe and America. And the Soviet Union had declared that there were, six? Was it authentic 6 or 5? 6 authentic revolutionary organizations in Africa. And these 6 groups, many of them, one of them like the ANC, were the ones that got all of the the training, they got ideological training, they got guns, they got military organizational training, and they got money from the Soviet Union. And the others had to fend for themselves. And the Soviet Union, of course, funded and supported those that better forwarded the interests of the Soviet Union. That makes sense, doesn't it? And what we were really concerned about that, why should any external force be able to say what line we should have in order to fight against our enemy? So we were convinced that, among other things, that it's possible for Africans ourselves. We can have our own international, because the Soviet was, at one time part of what was supposed to have been a communist international that was ended by Stalin, I think, in 45 or something like that, in the 40s, or certainly no later than the early 50s. So we concluded that we could build the African Socialist International. The fact is that we are one people everywhere. And we need, as Garvey understood, a single organization that could lead this movement. And if there was training that was needed, then we can provide the training. We could collectively raise the resources. When I say we, I'm talking about the African nation organized among itself could provide the training, could provide, collectively get the resources and everything else that was needed. And therefore, we could have an independent movement that spoke purely to the interests of the African nation under the leadership of the African working class. And so that was one of the reasons the ASI was conceived of. And so I want to say that. I want to open it up, brothers and sisters, comrades, for discussion now. We got a bit of time. So
They have to start.
you have to star 6
to unmute.
to unmute yourself.
Got a question from Facebook.
Facebook question, what is it?
Rashad Clyde say, why didn't our mothers and fathers come save us? I guess he's talking about from slavery.
I don't understand the question.
Wait, I guess he's meaning coming from.
You should ask him what he means. I don't understand the question. Why did our mother and father come save us? Because they were slaves too, I guess. And somebody need to save them. I mean, the lack of organization, ideological clarity, any of those things could. Yes, Uhuru.
I think that just for just for the few days that we've been discussing the Brexit, that it just shows the correctness of African internationalism. It really proves African internationalism to be correct, because everything that you have talked about and taught us, just it almost like it's unfolding before our very eyes. That Europe came together at the expense of Africa. Of the disunity of this integration of Africa. And it only follows suit that if Europe is breaking apart, that Africa has to move towards unity. It's just really like it's sequential, and it proves African internationalism, what we understand, and understand that we have to do certain things. We have to do a whole lot, but it's almost like it's preordained that Africa has to come together, again, and that this should mean our coming together, and the other thing that it proves is when you say that you look at Europe as one nation, to see that this integration that's happening in Europe right now, and it is happening everywhere that European is located, that they have the same understanding, it's just really, to me, that's the biggest thing that I get out of it, that African internationalism is the way forward. One thing that I'm confused about, I have a little confusion about, is around the whole question of the nation that you talk about, that we have to have national liberation, and we have to bring together the whole nation. And I look at it in context of, does it include, what we're talking about in terms of neocolonialism, that that we see this neocolonialism, that this is a period of the last thing that you said, in terms of one thing that we didn't do in the 60s was dismantle or approach the question of neocolonialism in a real concrete way. And this period I see as a period where neocolonialism is the thing that's rising to the top, that is signaling that we have to take apart neocolonialism. So I'd include it in the whole nation that we're talking about, in terms of we have to embrace the whole nation and forward the whole nation.
Well, the fact is that the African petty bourgeoisie is the class basis, generally speaking. It's where the neocolonialist forces spring from. But the neocolonialists themselves, and when you talk about neocolonialism, you're not talking about a class force. The neocolonial, I mean, you're talking about the African petty bourgeoisie. That is who becomes the neocolonialist. But all of the Africans are part of the nation. Neocolonialism is not a part of the nation. Neocolonialism is an extension of white power into the nation. It is the indirect rule of the African nation by white power in black faith. So when we say that the nation, consolidate the nation, we mean that under the leadership of the African working class. The African working class has to lead the struggle for national liberation. That's not what we saw in the 1960s with all over Africa. That's not what we saw, generally speaking, in the 1960s in the United States. Most of the so-called militant, even when we talk about this discussion about the Black Belt South and the 5 states stuff, what you're talking about is a petty bourgeois expression of a certain kind of patriotism, a refusal, an attachment to this land, to this base, to the white, where we were enslaved, that will not allow them to go all the way to Africa. So you got to be a new African that will allow you to get Chevrolets and Kool-Aids and whatever else that comes with being on this land, as opposed to assuming our responsibility for the liberation of our whole people. The vast majority of Africans do not live in Mississippi. The vast majority of Africans on the continent of Africa and catching hell as a consequence of the fact that there are Africans in Mississippi and Haiti and Jamaica and all those other places. So I'm saying that the whole nation, the African working class, has to lead this thing, because the African working class is the only social force that has no stakes in the existing social system and can only free itself, can only see freedom as a consequence of overthrowing the whole damn thing. The African petty bourgeoisie, what you see with neocolonialism is in the African world, it is opportunism that's raised to its highest extent. And so a sector of the African population become neo-colonial servants. This comes from the petty bourgeoisie. But when we talk about the nation, no, neo-colonialism is not a part of the nation, but the African petty bourgeoisie is a part of the nation. And who has to lead this struggle is going to have to be the African working class. And in terms of what this crisis shows us, clearly it shows us that the African nation must be united, but it won't happen by itself. And that even goes back, I think it references the inference that the person on Facebook about who's going to say, why didn't our mothers and fathers, because they didn't have the African People's Socialist Party and you do. Because they didn't have revolutionary organization and consciousness and you do. You have access to this. And none of this, nothing is going to happen. Your mama, your daddy, your cousin, and your dog. None of them are going to do the right thing without the proper kind of leadership and organization that's guided by advanced revolutionary theory. That's the African People's Socialist Party. That's the missing element. And what we have to do is be able to boldly admit that there were errors made in the past, and part of the errors and the weaknesses had to do with the fact, first, the class question, because we refuse to recognize that even in our midst, there were people who were working hand in glove with imperialism, and they do that even today. And sometimes we call them Reverend this and Reverend that, and sometimes we call them Senator this and Congressperson that, and sometimes we just call them Joe. But they in our own communities, and they work with white power. And I'm not talking about what we usually call Uncle Toms. I'm not talking about somebody who straightened their hair as opposed to wear it natural. I'm not talking about people who got a grill or don't have a grill. I'm talking about people who have a particular interest in the maintenance of the existing social system, that they benefit from it. They get paid off by it. That's a different class. They have a different class interest than the majority of the people. That doesn't mean that the workers don't do dumb stuff, stupid stuff at any given moment, because we do. And sometimes we are confused, but the fact is that it is not in our material interest to do those things. If we're working against ourselves when we do that, when the African petty bourgeoisie does it, he's working for himself, not against himself or herself. And that's the difference that we are talking about. And I think that the party is a critical question. That's why we are having this discussion right now, because without revolutionary party that's guided by advanced revolutionary theory, then we're not going to have a revolution. We're not going to have a revolution. And we can have meetings and discussions, and that's the weakness of what we see happening throughout this country today and much of the African world, that all of us got a good discussion. We talk about this stuff. In fact, talking has become really something that we're extremely good at, because that's all we do now. We talk on the internet, we talk on YouTube, we have all these different kinds of discussions, but who the hell is putting together the organization with the actual intent to take power, and that's actually growing the capacity, consciously growing the capacity to do that, not just to have a discussion, but to change the world. And that's what this discussion is about, changing the world. Uhuru. Anybody else?
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, yes.
Hey, this is Jordan. So
yes, Jordan.
A bit long-winded, but I just kind of wanted to make just kind of a few points. Because I know during the discussion that we had around the Brexit, you talked about, how things are moving so swiftly. So over the last few days, or over the last 24 hours, I've been thinking a lot about, just kind of my own experiences and the changes that I've seen in the world. And I'm thinking a lot about, when I was 15 years old, I was living in a trailer park in Indiana. And we had some, I'm surrounded by poor white people, and my family was the only African family.
You said poor white people or poor white people?
Poor white people.
Okay.
Poor white people.
All right. Because you had a chance if it was only 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what?
I said, because you had a chance if it was only 4, but go ahead.
Oh, no.
I got you. I'm just.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because, it was my family, the only African family, and there was 2 other Mexican families in the community. And at the time, there was that film that had been released, called like A Day Without Mexicans, and you had a lot of Mexican people who were, really, resisting, white imperialism, who were talking about being undocumented and whatnot. And we had this major breakout that, happened in our community, almost what I perceived as a race riot at that time, where, the white families were attacking us, on our way to the bus stop. We had the police called on us like 84 times within the span of like 6 months. So much stuff was happening. And what ended up happening was one of the Mexicans who lived next door to us ended up getting deported. Another one got put in jail, but nothing happened to, this poor white family, or the poor white people who were attacking us. And, we were children at the time, like getting attacked by adults, who had, brass knuckles and stuff coming to, fight us at the bus stop. I mean, all sorts of things were happening. But it was interesting, because then a year later, I was able to save the money. I went to Europe. I went to Italy, and I was in southern Italy, and I saw, the number of North African, East African, and, some West African immigrants who were in Rome. And then we would travel from southern Italy up to France, and I was in Paris, and I saw, kind of the same like phenomenon happening. And I was just kind of thrown up. I was like, wow, like where are all these, these African people coming from? I'm thinking I'm in Europe. I'm just supposed to see all white people. And not too long after that, all of these riots started breaking out, where they were dragging, African immigrants in the street and beating them up, pregnant women, all sorts of things. And so just kind of like seeing, now what's happening, with, all these tensions coming up amongst white nations, like not just 9 years later, right? Like now the EU is in crisis. And my roommate is from Italy, and I've just talked to him a lot about, kind of what's been going on. And he's been stressed out because he's in the law program here, and it's, he's in conflict resolution, and it's probably the best program in the world. And he's having, serious struggles around getting a job. And so he was finally able to get this interview with the UN, and he was set to take this job in Britain. And, he's just been struggling, talking about how the crisis is so bad in Italy, how they're so poor, and how there's no money, for all these social services and all these things, right? And so he was set to take his job in Britain, and now because of the Brexit, now he's worried about, whether or not he'll be able to even go there, because now there's no, open border access to England. So this is really has, far-reaching, just far-reaching consequences, happening across the wide world. And it's just amazing, and I appreciate the party, because just in, the short span of 9 years, seeing all of this, happen, and the party has really just summed it up, so well and so beautifully. And it just, really speaks to, the necessity of, us really having to get organized. So, I just really appreciate, this discussion just tremendously.
Oh, hold on. Is your roommate Italian or African?
No, sorry, he's Italian.
He's Italian. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and he has, he has 2 master's degrees and is not able to get a job. You know what I mean? And he's just like, freaking out because they just for so long have enjoyed this wealth, right? They've enjoyed access to jobs.
Yeah.
They haven't really known what it means to, to struggle. And so this is just all new to him. And he's paranoid. He has no idea what to do right.
Well, there's a Moms Mabley who used to be. Some people used to think she was funny. I didn't think she was that funny, but Jordan thought she was funny back in the day. She had a joke she told about an African and a white man who were traveling across the South, and they got captured by some white people. And some of you have heard me say this before. And the white people were going to hang them, and they had put ropes around the necks, and the white guy was going, "Oh, please, don't kill me. I don't deserve to die. Oh, please, Lord, don't kill me." And African said, say, "Man, why are you begging like that? Die like a man. You see me, you don't see me doing that." And the white guy said, "Yeah, but you're used to it." And I think the same thing is what we're talking about, the Italian who's catching a hell of a lot of hell because he's not used to it, right? And tell him to take a number. But yeah, I understand. And but the borders have not shut yet. And it's a really, in fact, there are sectors of the European Union want them to, England, now that you voted, get the hell out, because the longer this thing is delayed, and what has to happen is that the British Prime Minister has to enact, I've forgotten what it's called, it's 15 or 50, 51 or some article for exit. But they got a lot of struggles and negotiations to do. Because the British corporations, as well as the other corporations in Europe from around the world, they want England to have access they want to have access, easy access to the markets and things like that. They just don't want the immigrants. So they want to try to figure out, is there a way that we can open up just for the markets? Let's let the goods go back and forth and keep the niggas out, right? And so that's a kind of discussion, debate that they're involved in, at this moment. So he's got some breathing space, and it's going to be a couple of months before this thing, the borders actually get formally closed. And there's going to be a lot of maneuvering by the people who did not want to leave. Scotland is talking about, somebody's advising Scotland that they might have the ability to negate the vote. The Scots, and so all kinds of stuff is going on. But and this is what's really interesting about this. This is financial capital. This is different sectors of the bourgeoisie that has tried to hold this thing together. But what we're looking at right now is mobs of white people who saying, we don't give a damn about all of that, right? And we just want to be white again. And we want to have the advantages of being white. And so this is the same thing that's happening in this country, with Trump and Sanders, and you see it happening in various other places. They are disregarding the leadership that's tied to capital, and to certain sectors of capital, because there are some sectors of capital with reactionary interests, want to go back to the old places because they lost out in a very serious way with the borders being open and all of that stuff. So it's just an interesting situation. And you're right, it's really critical for us. That's what having a revolutionary party should mean. It means being able to take advantage of these crises. That's why having revolutionary theory is so important. It means that you're not just somebody who's dragged around by events, that what's happening now, you do something, what's happening now, you do something, but there is a strategic trajectory that we're always on based on theory. And that's why, I don't know how the Black Belt South people, for example, are examining this question and what it would mean to them. How do they examine, the whole Brexit and all of this kind of stuff, other stuff that's happening in the world as well. And revolutionary theory is just a critical thing that we have to have if we're going to win.
Yeah, he told me that, that sort of white nationalist reactionary, the reactionary parties have really been on the rise too. He said in Northern Italy, which is the wealthier part of the country, that there's this party called the Northern League that's very white nationalist. They're really against immigrants. And they've really gone so far as like trying to separate, from Italy. They wanted to separate from the EU. And I guess there's been the same kind of phenomenon happening in Austria, where now they want to put up borders because there's been so many immigrants coming through Italy, up through Central, Europe and, over to the West. And it's created conflict, between Italy and Austria, you can say Yugoslavia and Hungary. And just all of these sort of white extremist parties are now on the rise.
Yeah.
He was just we were connecting it to, the rise of Trump. So
yeah,
it's interesting stuff. Man.
Yeah, we have a relationship, minimum with people in Italy. What is that? The The Millennium
Group.
What's the group that call themselves the
Communitarian.
Communitarian. Yeah, communitarian. Yeah. These are forces in Italy, and then in Spain, of course, you've got similar tensions, and this is stuff that's existed for a long time. France, this has existed for a very long time, so it's not new. It's just deepened now, and it's reached a nodal point, so to speak. Anyone else, comrades? Anything else?
Got some on Facebook.
What we have on Facebook?
Coco Lewis, Chairman, can you speak to the role of awakening the middle class?
Awakening the middle class? I don't feel like that's a primary task. I think that
the role. Speak to the role of the awakening. I'm saying, of the awakening middle class.
Okay, I'm not sure I have recognized such a thing as an awakened middle class, unless you want to talk about something like what the Negroes just did in the House of Representatives, leading the so-called sit-in there, and there's another sector, obviously, of the middle class in the African world that has been able to see and experience the decline of white power, and that has been moving to try to come together to boldly replace it. Some of them have in Africa have deepened relationship with China and other forces that allows them to contend with the American and particularly American imperialists. But I'm not sure I recognize what the comment here is addressing when he talks about the awakening middle class. Anybody else, comrades? Anything else? Magda in Sweden. What's up? Stockholm.
*6 to unmute yourself.
*6 to unmute. Uhuru.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of comments.
Well, you ought to say who you are.
I know you, Tim.
I say you ought to say who you are. Who you are, where you calling from.
This is Omali out of Houston. I want to just say something about, how like this Christian ideology is a serious question. I think, with bunch of practical implications. I think, like when you talked earlier on about the authentic sick that was identified by the Soviet Union, by the former Soviet Union, as the only authentic liberation organization on the continent of Africa. Well, I think it had nothing to do with the authenticity of the movements themselves, but had the different communist parties in the areas, including the one down in South Africa in occupied Tanzania, that was basically responsible for organizing the African, the land up within the African National Congress. And the other movements, that my team was obviously not allowed to develop on their own because they had been predetermined by resources, by training, who would come out on top. So in those respects, ideology and the different communist parties, especially the one down in South Africa, only a few years earlier, had called for power to the white workers. I think some of these different cases can be seen with Cuba and the Communist Party in Cuba touring the Soviet line back then with respect to when Robert Williams had been exiled over to Cuba, but Robert Williams' line did not correspond to the Communist Party USA line, and Robert Williams had to get somewhere. So he ended up in China. Could not go anywhere in Africa because, we are the ASI wasn't on the ground. My opinion, this is what makes this ASI such a impressive and needed kind of organizational structure that's going to be critical in freeing African people. But my point here is the importance of ideology and our ability to spread African internationalism throughout the world, especially throughout the African world, so that we will know liberation in our lifetime. Just I'll make those two comments. And other thing is that on page 3, we were talking about the massive reserve labor force, and I'm wondering how we re-look that question. How we look at it now?
I think that I want to appreciate the practical implications that K-Fing was raising around this question too, in terms of how it's impacted in various places. I mean, we had pretty good relationships. Cuba used to carry the Burning Spear newspaper and various other kinds of communications until the Communist Party USA got involved. And the Communist Party USA, everybody, to get to Cuba, there was a time that you had to go through the Communist Party USA. And so it wrecked that relationship for a long period of time. And you had a situation where, Cuba was dependent on this relationship with the Soviet Union. I mean, that's just a reality. And, so I think that's real. And also, I think that people, K-Fing said something about the question of the labor force being rethought. I'm not quite sure what that is about, but I do want to say that when you look at the possibilities of disunited Europe, because with England stepping out, all the other countries are going to have to look out for what they perceive to be their own interests. I say countries, I'm talking about all the other states, all capital, how it's dispersed in these different regions, have to look out for their own particular interests. And the U.S. was able to maintain a united front against Russia in Europe. All the EU, went along with it. Then the headquarters of the NATO is in where? in Brussels, right? In Belgium. So in this fracturing of the European Union, what does it mean for being able to contain Russia? What does it mean now for any of the European states that want to get making its own deal with Russia? They got economic crises and problems throughout Europe. Russia is petroleum rich, among other things. And so I can see a greater possibility for a whole realignment of political forces on the continent of Europe. What does it mean for how the U.S. has been trying to unite much of Europe in containing China, and how China moves? If each of the different states now begin to move based on its own agenda, on its own perceived interests, there are profound implications to this. And the question that we are confronted with all the time is that too much of our leadership, too often, is wedded, married, in bed with a sector of imperialism, and would keep the rest of us in bed with imperialism, as opposed to charting our own independent direction that speaks to our own needs. They're fearful, they're timid, and some of them are, we work with at different times. They cannot perceive of having power. And one reason they can't perceive of having power is because they're not organizing to have power. Some of them, they're not doing anything. But it's we, who truly believe, not only can we have power, but we have a responsibility to take power. That's what we're struggling for every day, to be a self-governing people ourselves. And that has to be more than just words. You have to do things. You have to create certain kind of organization. You have to try to create a cadre of certain people who are willing and capable of making the sacrifices. You have to have a clear advanced theory about what the hell it is that you're struggling for. I mean, these are just practical kinds of things, and we do these things because we plan to lead. And that's what, I'm very serious about this. We plan to lead, and I'm looking at who's going to be holding what post in the post imperialist world, who's going to be holding what positions, posts, offices in a free Africa and in a free African community. That's the kind of stuff that I'm looking at, and I'm seeing that part of what we're doing is preparing our forces to govern, not to just find a way to get the best deal we can get from Bernie, or to force Hillary to adopt Bernie Sanders. What kind of strategy is that for liberation? Now I'm going to have a demonstration at the Democratic Convention to force Hillary to adopt Bernie Sanders' pro-platform. What kind of weak position is that? You understand? I mean, it's just it doesn't make any sense at all. So we have a much better worldview, and that worldview is informed by African internationalism. We know what started it, we know what can bring it down, and we know the power, the latent power of the people once it's unleashed through the organization of the Revolutionary Party. Uhuru. Anybody else, comrades?
Chairman, what effect do you think this will have on the continent?
Well, I think that I think that the effect on the continent is that I'm trying to figure out, like, the value of the U.S. of the British pound is plunging. So whomever, unfortunately, you don't have like independent economic forces on the continent. Most of the corporations and what have you are foreign-owned corporations. I don't know. We're going to have to see, because as I was mentioning earlier about the African petty bourgeoisie doesn't see an ability to chart an independent course, and so you might find, except for the French puppet Negroes, them Negroes going to do whatever Hollande or whoever, this Marine Le Pen, who might be the next prime minister, we can't tell. They're going to do what in France they're gonna toe the line. Generally speaking, I'm talking about the petty bourgeoisie. The problem is that I think the crisis will deepen on the continent of Africa. And I think it opens up tremendous doors for African internationalists, for the African People's Socialist Party, which is one of the reasons why I think we have to take so seriously this historical moment and our responsibility at this moment. There's no sacrifice that's too great for us to make right now to take advantage of the disarray of the imperialists. As the imperialists become more in more disarray, then it's clearly our responsibility to tighten our stuff, to become more effective, to develop as real cadre, to do whatever is necessary to bring it down so that our people can be free, and also not just to bring it down, but be prepared to govern. And that's the struggle that we're involved in, creating these institutions, institutionalizing our presence in the world, and developing the deepest kinds of connections we can with the masses of our people. Sometimes through these institutions, through the political education relationship, through organizing the people around critical questions, which is one of the reasons, coming out of our 6th Congress, we emphasized the whole issue of this, the 5th Congress, 6th Congress of, the labor union work, the work that we do to get into these damn prisons, and which are not, we turn them into universities, revolutionary universities, so that we recruit in the prison. So when people come out, there's a place, for them to create, to organize on these campuses, and young people, just to really deepen our connection to the masses of the people and to become more competent. And then the Black is Back Coalition is one of the things that will give us a connection with sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie, sometimes radical, etc. But it's a critical kind of organizational relationship that we have with these forces, and that's why we have to become more competent and capable and build this coalition to realize its greatest potential. That's why even now, as we're looking at the disarray of the imperialists, not just in Europe, because when we say in Europe and in England, there's a war that's happening in England. There's a war happening within the different political parties in England. Not just there, but the disarray that's existing inside the U.S. as well. Is a point I was going to make. But anyway, comrades, is there anything else?
One other thing, Jim. Can you hear me?
Yes, K-Fing.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so important that an uneasy equilibrium be, that we make that book accessible to all parts of the globe. See, because it's quite clear that imperialism, and even the British shit over there, they're not moving from a position of strength. They're moving from a position of weakness.
That's right.
And I think that's what needs to be shown, because the nationalists are still talking about the white people do what they want to do.
Yeah.
But I think they're doing what they got to do.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So let's move into the book.
Yeah. Uhuru. And different sections of the book, and make it more accessible in terms of how it's presented too. I think that's right on. Yeah. All right, comrades.
There's a question on, this is Ghazi, there's a question on YouTube from Luwezi.
Okay. Oh, Luwezi, Uhuru comrade, yes.
It says, what is the role of Irish revolutionaries in the context of the British crisis?
That's a good question, Comrade Luwezi, and it's not one that I've paid that much attention to, because I'm still trying to sort out. I know that is it Sinn Féin, and I'm not putting Sinn Féin in the revolutionary camp by any means. It was radical militant Irish petty bourgeoisie who actually participated through the Irish Republican Army, strong fight with British for Irish independence in theory. But the Irish Republic is is it split? Is that how it is? Is the Irish Republic? There's Northern Ireland still. That's and say it again.
The Southern Ireland did not vote. I think it's its own. It didn't vote in this. I don't think.
I've forgotten that there's a split there. There's a split there. And I'm not. Carmen Louisa, can you contribute something to that?
Is he on the phone?
He's on YouTube. He's on YouTube. But we can talk about it more, Louisa. People here on here should know that on Africa Live at 11 o'clock, we're going to be discussing the so-called Brexit and what's happening, the dissolution of the European Union, along with the question of the African who refused to tip the white waiter. That's caused some stir of interest. And what was another question that we were looking at for that?
Orlando shooting.
In the Orlando shooting.
As well as the city.
Orlando shooting, how the sit-in at the House of Representatives demanding gun control. Those are things that. So hopefully people will come on to Africa Live at 11. That's at 11, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Uhuru.
Chairman, did the conference that you attended or that the party attended in Russia, did it speak to this crisis?
No, it did indirectly, because what the Russians were doing was trying to unite anybody who was for self-determination that was a part of a European or US-based power. That's why we were there. They wanted to be able to promote and support. So some of the people who they would promote and support, like there was some Mexican group that was supposed to have been there but wouldn't show up because we were going to be there. And we were going to be there saying, how the hell you going, this is what Mexican group, these are white people who in Texas who wanted to separate, from the US. And we were going to actually have to challenge them by trying to, recapture or pass on the ownership, assume a new ownership for Mexican territory. And then there were people who from Italy, Spain, all kinds of different forces, some from Ukraine, and some of them were objectively in a good place. And when I say objectively, because they helped to frustrate the efforts of the imperialists like Ukraine and what the US and the imperialists were trying to do there with Russia. And the Irish Republican Socialist Party, as well as the Sinn Féin, the Republican Sinn Féin, which is different from the Jerry Adams Sinn Féin, was also there. So some of the people who were there were people with whom that the Russians just wanted to they were trying to work with anybody, and they call it anti-globalization. Work with anybody that was opposed to, that wanted self-determination. Their project was designed to try to fracture the solidarity inside the European countries. And of course, they might have wasted their money because it seemed like they didn't need to spend it because the British, the white people in general are working in that direction. Is there anyone else? Comment, Penny, you want to say anything before we're going to shut it down?
Lord Chairman, well, I think this is a great discussion, and I just really wanted to express unity with your overview about the whole role of the ASI in the context that the African Socialist International came out of the trajectory of the Garvey movement. And I just think that was so clear and so powerful. And also that I think that the fracturing of Europe is really significant, and the same thing is happening here in the United States. And I think that, just for the world struggle, it shows that Europe and US are not invincible, that they are cannibalizing themselves. And because of, like you're saying, the anti-colonial struggles, the people taking back their resources, and it's just playing out, as has been said. as you've laid it out for the last like 30 or 40 years. It's just playing it out, because even in the New Beginning, the book, The New Beginning, you said that imperialism is in a crisis for the same reason, because the anti-colonial struggles are seizing the control over the resources and preventing the parasitic, continuation. And we're just seeing what you said 30 years ago and more happening now. So it's really, really powerful.
The New Beginning was the main resolution or political report for the first Congress of the party that was held in 1981. 1981. The other thing I wanted to say is, one of the reasons I asked you to say something is because when we look at the fracturing of Europe, we have to look at what the implications of the existence of the African People's Solidarity Committee is in that context. Because what you're looking at is white people running now to find solutions. And we are offering them a solution in solidarity with other peoples around the world, even as Europe fractures. And we've said that what has to happen is that whites have to be involved in a process of committing what? National suicide. And so we don't fret the dissolution of the European nation at all. In fact, we want to contribute to that, and that's part of the process of national suicide, when there's a sector of that population that is consciously participating in its dissolution, dissolve the bourgeois nation that came into the existence as a consequence of slavery and colonialism. So I want to appreciate that, comrades. And let's turn it over now to Comrade Secretary General Gaida. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades, I want to continue to get.
Yeah, what is it?
No, I just want to make sure that I'm about to end the broadcast. What you're saying,
I want to continue to get the names of people who came on subsequent to us, doing roll calls. So if you came on and you have not been involved in any of the roll calls, would you tell me who you are? Would you give me your name?